Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Training, Learning, and Development community. Thanks for joining us today. Have a great guest, Mike Jones, who we were just chatting earlier about how I think it was a couple of years ago that I actually invited him to come on the Crowdcast. So looking back at my LinkedIn messaging, I'm like, wow, it was a while ago. So Mike, glad that we can finally get you on here.
Glad to be here. Hi, everyone. Good morning.
So before we get started, I just want to say a couple of things. Thanks everyone that participated in Community Day last week. That was a blast. It was a lot of fun. I didn't know what to expect, and it ended up being like pretty much, I think, how I wanted it to go. It was really informal and it was cool. Everybody just, came in, hung out. It wasn't a thing where you had to be there all day. You could pop in, pop out, and just jump into sessions as you wanted, jump into tables as you wanted. So it was very, very cool. I'm thinking that we're probably going to do the next one Friday, April 30th. So mark that down in your calendars. I'll make more formal announcements later, but you guys that are in here get the special preview of the date. So thanks again for joining us in Community Day. All right, so now we're going to be talking with Mike Jones, e-learning development guru, instructional design nerd, lifelong learner. It's great to meet you. So Mike, how did you get into instructional design? What's the deal? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So about a decade ago at this point, I actually started out as a K through 12 music teacher here in Pennsylvania. Percussion, have the drums still, got rid of most of the instruments, but couldn't get a full-time position. So like a lot of people, I know a lot of people in the field that were teachers, went to school, actually fell into a master's program, applied like 2 days before the fall semester started, got in, and a part of it, the program was adult education communications technology. So like this really vague and big amalgamation of different topics. And a part of it was instructional design. And so, my background with like curriculum design, I like to joke with some directors or higher ups whenever they get a little bit too high strung about training that I'm just working with larger 6-year-olds that can walk themselves to the restroom. I used to teach kindergarten, so that's where that joke comes from. Doesn't always go over too well, but yeah, so got that master's degree with the full intention to become like a technology specialist in the school district system here in Pennsylvania. Realized that, hey, there's only a handful of band director positions in a district, and there's only one technology head per district. Probably not the best career move to get more specialized when I couldn't already get a job. So made the leap into instructional design and haven't looked back. Moved to Baltimore for a short period of time, back home here to near Pittsburgh, and been jumping around. I've been remote for, coming up on, it's been 5 years, remote in different positions. So.
Wow, kindergarten teacher to instructional design nerd. That's a new one for me. I mean,
Yep.
Lots of teachers, but not kindergarten.
Yep.
I have a 7-year-old, so I can totally, I can really sort of, when I think about him, just think about his teachers moving into instructional design. That's a pretty big leap.
Mm-hmm.
So were you like kind of already kind of nerdy prior to that? Were you like into computers and stuff anyway, or into building?
Yeah. That's a great question. The short answer is yes. Always dabbled in development, graphic design. In college, especially, had like a Sony Handycam. I'd run around campus making dumb videos, sometimes for class, sometimes for not. But yeah, and so always been curious. Always enjoyed the design portion of it. And yeah, I've continued that, I think, moving into instructional design and the different positions that I've had so far.
Wow, no, that's great. That's a great story. And so now, looking at your LinkedIn profile, it seems like you've pretty much established yourself, and you've got a huge following. I haven't seen any of your work, but what is your typical day like? Can you
Sure.
describe a little bit of what you go through before we get into the tool stuff?
Sure. So right now I'm a learning experience designer with Lyft. And so my typical day is coming up with learning solutions or identifying if there is a learning solution for a lot of the problems that our customer service associates. So if you ever use Lyft, you have an issue and you write in chat or call, I'm helping that population of support associates. So, uh, to be honest, my day to day has been less of the e-learning development. We've been doing more informal learning and social learning. So there's been much more job aids. There's been much more change management, communications, helping with that marketing of
Mhm.
changes to tooling and what have you. So that has been the day to day for the last 2 years. Previous to that was much more day to day developing in storyline from sun up to sundown, a lot more e-learning development. So, but yeah,
Nice. Okay. So what are the kinds of projects that you typically like to work on? What's the
sure.
stuff that makes the day go by quick?
Sure. So I am definitely the soup to nuts person. I think a few people on my LinkedIn profile have referred to me as the unicorn. I enjoy going from the analysis, the initial conversation about what's going on, never coming to the table thinking that, hey, training is what we need, learning is what you need, learning is what you need. I need to make AR, VR. I never lead with the technology or the solution. And so
Uh-huh.
I enjoy that. I enjoy the writing. I enjoy the design. Writing, learning outcomes, really big on Kathy Moore's action mapping, especially in this current environment with performance based, outcome based
Mhm.
learning that we need to drive for. But really, and then I don't know. I like the shift, like the seasons of the project, that analysis, the design, and development, where I can really be okay. I understand what the problem is. Let me really unleash that creativity and develop something hopefully cool. It might not always be as gorgeous or a something that would end up in a portfolio per se.
Mhm.
Sometimes the design's more
Mhm.
utilitarian than anything else, but just that full gambit of one day I might do a job aid that has no pictures because they just need a checklist. Next day I might do something that is multi-level, gamified, scenario-based storyline simulation,
Yeah.
and so doing all of that.
That's great. Yeah, like Lisa's saying, unicorn, love doing a variety of things. Yeah, that's totally cool. And thanks, Jeff, for posting that link over to Kathy Moore's action mapping. That's great. If any of you out there haven't looked at that, definitely take a look at it. It's really, really good stuff. All right, cool. So I figure, like I was saying earlier, we're talking about tools. So we'll break it down into 3 sections, and we've got like, I don't know, another 30 minutes or so. So let's talk about, like, we're going to go into e-learning development tools, into like whatever your instructional design tools are. And then also, if we have time, we can get into what kind of tools you might use as somebody who's a lifelong learner. And then we also got a couple questions in the QA. I want to make sure that Darcy's questions get answered there. So, okay, let's get into it.
Definitely.
Talk about your e-learning development tools. I can't wait to hear this.
Sure. So I think it would help everyone to understand like how I approach tools in general. There's a fair number of people that market themselves, or like I've seen a lot of work where I'm a Beyond expert, or I'm a storyline expert, or I'm a Captivate expert. I kind of approach tools in general as more of a toolbox. And so you're not going to necessarily use the same tool for all problems. It would be the equivalent of me taking a jackhammer if I need to screw in a light bulb or something like that. So for e-learning, primarily, and my go-to for years has been the Articulate suite. Now Articulate 360. I remember when Storyline first came on the market. That was my first instructional design job. Had two colleagues that went to, I think it was DevLearn that year, and came back with the scoop that, hey, Articulate's coming out with something new. That's not where I started. I actually started with Adobe Captivate, but really, except for the first instructional design gig out of school, there hasn't really been too many organizations that have used Captivate. Later in my career, Captivate and even less Lectora has been more instances when I need to troubleshoot something, or if there is an existing department or an existing practice of using those two tools, especially when I was in the consulting world. Did much more troubleshooting of why Captivate and Lectora weren't working necessarily. And so, but yeah, in terms of authoring, that's where I've started, or where I typically point people in the direction of Articulate. What else? Had a few projects where we used Vyond for the animated videos. Also really big on using Adobe's Creative Suite for photography, for asset manipulation. For a period there, a couple roles ago, made an entire library of illustrated food icons in Illustrator. Definitely takes me a little bit longer than someone that does graphic design every day, but I think having enough of a skill set in all of these different tools to be dangerous, having one that I specialize in, Articulate, but also being familiar enough to understand what else is out there to be able to contribute, in my experience, especially in the e-learning development world, has been nothing but it opens up more markets, more opportunities, to just be familiar with that larger landscape.
Do you have any kind of formal design background?
Really, no. There was some multimedia design in that master's program that I talked about, but even then, the unique thing of that program was it was kind of intended for the people that did go to school for graphic design. It was in the same college, so a lot of the people that I came back to school with were straight out of undergrad, had the graphic design, had the videography, had all of that background. So it was a little bit of a crash course. There was one course where we did photo slideshows, and then the other one was creating like instructional multimedia. And so that assumed that you already had a background in it. So there definitely was people that came back to school that were already in the field, fellow teachers that came back, they struggled with that. Where I think that always being curious and always dabbling lend
Yeah.
itself to me.
So, like with your background, so you're talking about how you used to run around campus with a Sony camera, so kind of an informal background with media. Is there anything specific from that informal background that has really helped you with your sort of e-learning development current needs? You know, was there anything
Yeah.
yeah?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think all of it really helped. Just being able to produce video, being curious about how, like, I didn't have lighting, didn't have a professional microphone, and so learning how to work with what I had, and getting crafty. I remember for the one video we wanted to have a lightsaber effect, and so looking out on the web and finding some, I think it was from the Netherlands, some random plugin that I could overlay into the tool that I was using at the time for editing. And so just like being very scrappy and saying, okay, here's what I want to do. Here's my vision. I don't have the greatest equipment. What can I do? And how can I think about this thoughtfully to produce that? That helped, especially in roles where like producing video for multi-million dollar retail firms on an iPhone.
Yeah.
And so just being it kind of feels like being a little bit of MacGyver,
Yeah.
to use that quote or to use that reference.
Yeah. Nice.
But it also has helped with knowing enough to be dangerous, to be able to talk like, okay, which codecs are you using, to be able to, if we did partner with a third party, like with a vendor, to
Mhm.
actually understand what they're talking about and to weigh in, to ask questions, always
Yeah.
trying to learn and grow in those situations. So
Nice. So would you recommend if somebody were like kind of a newer e-learning development person and they're like, okay, what tool should I start out with? Is it just
mhm.
kind of universally just go with Storyline?
Yeah, I think Storyline and Articulate in general, not only for the tool, but also the wealth of knowledge that's in the community.
Mm,
I know other tools have made substantial strides since then, but just for someone that hasn't, if you haven't touched graphic design before, if you are kind of thrown into the position, Articulate and their community has a wealth of knowledge and resources, and it's a great way to start if you're just getting into the field.
nice. That's excellent. All right, cool. Any other tools that you can think of? Like Beyond is something like tell me a little bit just how exactly do you use
Yeah.
Beyond?
So Beyond was honestly for one client. It was to do an explainer video, and so something that was typically presented in ILT, I think, or might have even been a document. We took the story of the content and actually acted it out with Beyond. And the reason we went with that tool is just the speed to using their pre-built templates um, to create a video that made that dry content more palatable and interesting.
Mhm,
That was also when the whiteboard uh, effect was really taking off, and
mhm.
so a client came to us and said, "We want a video. We want to turn this into a video. We want it to be quick. We want it to be engaging. Oh, and we've seen a lot of whiteboard videos. Can you do that?" And so instead of we talked about, well, what would it take to record someone actually sketching it out versus buying a license to that tool? So
Nice. Okay, cool. How do you storyboard?
storyboarding has taken different approaches over the course of my career. Initially, it was very much the traditional Word doc, text-based storyboarding, where you have your slide number, what's on screen, what's in narration, where your programming is going to go. And in so in a formal learning environment that worked, but in other environments where there's more practical experience, someone that came up from the sales floor, let's say, and is now designing training, visual storyboarding has been a game changer for those instances. Um, something about seeing more than reading really fills in the gaps, especially if it's an organization that's new to e-learning. So that could be anything from sketching out on my iPad Pro in an app like Paper or Notability, and then sharing those pictures and talking through what the concept is at a high level, to sketching out every screen, depending on that. There are other times where I've considered storyboarding to be kind of that functional prototype where it's okay, we have a bunch of different directions that we could go. We're having difficulty getting consensus from stakeholders. Let's actually get into storyline and build a few slides, enough to give the sense of the structure in the storyboard, and using that as sort of a living, breathing storyboard to uncover where people disagree or preconceived notions, and to actually talk through that. And then we might jump into one of those other formats, like, okay, we agree on these five storyboarded visual slides that you can see, touch, and feel. Um, then we can move into the more ambiguous, okay, based off of this is what it looks like in text, and we can expand from there. So a combination of different approaches.
Wow. So is there a particular e-learning tool that you couldn't live without or that you have to use? I mean,
Yeah.
obviously Storyline is your tool of choice, but is there anything that just like is absolutely just a required thing for you to be able to start building
Yeah.
stuff?
uh, It used to be there wasn't really anything that I couldn't live without, but I found especially in those organizations where there's the practical experience or not a traditional learning um, environment is TechSmith, Snagit, and or Camtasia. Just for the quick ability to grab screenshots, to grab a quick recording and make a quick animated GIF, depending which camp you're in, yeah, just quickly annotating a screenshot. Um, have come into some headwind in some organizations where the opinion is, well, your computer, if you have a Mac or if you have a Chromebook or if you have Windows, like a lot of these OSs now have the ability to take a screenshot. But my push is for that investment, really, for the license, it drastically reduces the overall time and workload to do whatever type of capture you need, annotate it, animate it, whatever you need to do to it, and quickly get it out the door versus, okay, I'm going to take the screen, just the efficiency of the workflow. You don't have to take the screenshot in one tool, bring it into another tool, do what you need, export it, potentially have to take it into a third tool, and yada yada. So
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I definitely use Snagit and Camtasia on a regular business, and I don't even build any e-learning myself. It's just part of my day-to-day, and even running TLDC. I'm always constantly grabbing stuff, and most of the videos I do are formatted. It's probably overkill, but formatted in Camtasia. So
yep.
I totally agree. That's good stuff. Okay, so let me see. There's a few questions here that are related to tools in our Q&A section. So I wanted to get Darcy's question answered here. He's Darcy saying, sharing tools with your team. What's the tool in your toolbox that you found is most easily adopted by teammates and colleagues? What is the tool that your teammates, colleagues have had the most difficulty adopting? So that's a two-parter. So
Yeah,
most easily adopted.
great question, Darcy. Man, I'm going to try and pick one. So it depends on the organization. I
Uh-huh.
think you definitely want to fill out the leadership, the IT landscape. The one that pops into my head right now, staying in the Articulate 360 suite, I'm going to break it down a little bit. The one that has been easiest to drive adoption for is Rise, just for the speed of use, the widgetized design, the WYSIWYG approach that they have with that tool. We actually have someone on my current team who doesn't have a design background, is more of a facilitator that got a license and is now able to help us with instructional design related tasks without really any training. So just the ease of use and the ability and the polished look really goes a long way with that. Storyline has been a little bit more challenging just for the time that it takes to create compared to Rise. So we started, in hindsight, we brought the Articulate 360 suite into this organization, started with Rise because we needed to produce something quicker, moving out of Google Slides. And so we wanted something that was going to be engaging, or more engaging. And so everyone latched onto that. And then when we said, okay, now we can do something that's really interactive, but it's going to double or quadruple the time it's going to take to produce. That is challenging. I think the attitude, if you start with Rise, is why can't all of the tools be this easy, especially if it's a team that doesn't have that existing or is new to the process, new to the development.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, Darcy's saying, same Rise adoption trend at our org. It's actually scary how many people are requesting a seat. It's a good problem to have, maybe.
Yeah, governance becomes a challenge, especially if you don't control who gets that seat, or like I've seen it spin out um, of control quite easily, unfortunately, especially if it's not really gated too well or owned by a group, the licensing. If
Mhm.
it's not owned by a group that's doing the work, sometimes it can get a little out of hand. So
Oh, Phil has a point here. He says he can't use Rise due to the lack of the LMS support. That's interesting.
Could you say more, Phil? Is it the lack you don't have an LMS to use with your system or with your org, or?
Yeah, I haven't heard that one, but
Yeah, that's new for me too.
yeah, yeah. Great. Okay. And so would you say then the most difficulty adopting would be Storyline?
Yeah, anything that is more intense. I think we're kind of in this gold rush with instructional design and development. There's a lot of people getting into the space, and a lot of orgs are trying to do less with more, and so promoting from within, which is great. Love the perspective that that brings, but with it, kind of the attitude that, what do you mean this is going to take me 40 hours to develop something that I could do in 2 hours in Rise? And that perception of I've heard the analogy is the juice worth the squeeze, so to speak. And a lot of people tend to go with, kind of like with graphic design, Canva or Adobe Spark is a lot easier to use and quicker to produce something
Mm-hmm.
than to go into Illustrator or Photoshop.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a great point. Okay. And it looks like like Lisa's saying that that Rise does support SCORM now, I think. It used to not be able to support it. So I don't know, maybe Phil, you can check that out. That's great. All right. And then Darcy also asked about low code or no code dev tools. I know we had
Yeah,
talked, Mike, that you don't have any experience with that. I have a little bit of experience with no code. Like, for instance, the tldc.com website is built using Webflow, which is a no code tool, and I love it. I just prefer it over WordPress. WordPress is just, for me, was just constantly updating
yeah,
and fighting off spammers and all of that stuff. People were just trying to hack my site all the time. But
yeah,
with Webflow, it's so easy, and you just have to kind of spend some time with it, and it's incredible. And I don't know. I use Zapier for some things, and I don't know, but yeah, and I think that I want to do another a no code crowdcast at some point. And I know that Devlin, who I think might still be in, also uses Webflow and has some experience with no code. So we'll check with him later on that. Now, Dave is asking, do you ever use a tool to build more complex animations that you can't do in Storyline and import them into your course, like Animate?
yeah. Anytime I've needed to do more complex animations, I've actually dabbled um, After Effects
Mm,
with doing it from scratch. I've also used a number of plugins uh, for that makes After Effects a little bit easier to approach. I'm blanking on the name of it right now, but I can follow up. I want to say it's Mr. Horse
mm,
is a plugin that I've used that helps with the animation of objects. But I'm a little bit, and to go back to Darcy's question for a minute, and in line with this question about animation, I've always been a tinkerer. So I enjoy tinkering or growing that skill set. So I'd encourage people, like, if you're not used to After Effects and that's something, that subscription is something that you can afford, there's a lot of great resources to dabble in it. I would say that given my limited proficiency with animation, that definitely is something that I will think through. Is it really worth the time and effort for the animation? But yeah, if I was doing animation, it would usually, it's either, if I can't do it in Storyline, if I can't somehow hack it together, it's either Camtasia. If I can hack it together there, PowerPoint is another hacky place where I might try to fake my way through that animation, or if I absolutely need to or know that I can't do it in either of any of those other tools, it's opening up After Effects and working through that process.
wow, I would love to have some skills with After Effects. That's something last few years I've always like
Yeah,
put on my someday list,
yeah,
to get going. Darcy did post in a link to MrHorse.com. So Hopefully that's helpful for
Thanks,
folks.
Darcy.
All right, now let's see. So let me ask you, what you describe yourself as an instructional design nerd. What
Mhm.
exactly, how would you describe an instructional design nerd?
Sure. So I think an instructional design nerd is someone that is always curious, always looking at how things are designed, how like and that goes into like how commercials, if you're watching TV, like, hey, what was the creative process to come up with this idea that the owl is the best illustration for me to want to purchase or ask my doctor about this drug. And so always kind of trying to break down ideas, listening to how people talk and approach like social justice topics. And everything I do, I'm always thinking through, okay, how did you arrive at that point? And I think that's where it starts, being curious. In terms of being an instructional design nerd, adult learning theory nerd, it's it's just a continuation of that curiosity, and I enjoy understanding other people's perspectives. So there's quite a few theorists out there. There's a lot, like we could probably do a series on different adult learning theories and different methodologies and never run out of content. And I don't necessarily take those as any one of them as gospel, so to speak. It's more just it's building that base of diverse perspectives and how people approach the challenge of how do people learn, how do you share, how do you grow as a human. I think a lot of that stems from my time in the classroom, going back to kindergarten, watching 6 year olds enjoy listening to music and seeing what types of pictures they would draw. The same thing goes for adults, building off of how does your experience as an adult approach your day to day life, your work, and just always being curious to understand how everyone approaches, processes, and goes through this everyday life.
Nice. So do you have like a dedicated strategy to develop that sort
Yeah,
of that instructional design knowledge?
yeah. So a lot of books. My tools, I think, for the instructional design point, or to recenter on that question around tools, books, learning about new processes. There's quite a few, or I've worked with a number of people that like I know Addy. That's the one thing that I need. There's nothing else out there versus okay, I've used Addy. That's what I was initially trained on. Then I heard about the success of approximation model, SAM, Kathy Moore's action mapping, and really books, blogs, videos, communities like the TLDC, uh, Learning Guild, ATD. There's lots of resources. There's always new research coming out. I don't necessarily buy every book or read every paper, but it's just being curious and open. And if something does pique an interest or feels like it could fit a need for what I have, that's when I'll invest the time in that book, or that series of YouTube videos or what have you. There's
Mhm.
a lot of resources out there to keep growing in that field.
Nice. So if you've got an instructional design itch to scratch and you're like, okay, what am I going to use to satisfy this right now? Is
Yep.
there any place in particular that you go to?
It depends. It depends if the scratch, if the if the itch I'm trying to scratch is in the development space, I might go and do a Google search for like graphic design inspiration or the articulate community, see what's being uploaded there.
Yeah.
Twitter is a good place. There's a number of lists out there. A lot of good information being shared. YouTube. It kind of depends on what that itch is. If it is okay, I feel like I need to develop professionally, I'll go on my iPad, open up Apple Books, and see what either instructional design book might be out there. I'll check ATD's website to see what's new, what's popular, seeing what is getting buzz, and go from there. So it just depends on the day.
Nice. Okay. And that's actually kind of a nice segue into sort of the lifelong learner topic of
Mhm.
things. So, there's it seems like there would be sort of some similar tendencies maybe in that direction as a lifelong learner, or how would you describe that?
Yeah, I think it goes for any profession, not just learning and development, but if you stop learning and growing, you're not really doing it right. I think back to a story of a teacher that I replaced whenever I was in the classroom still. He had been doing it for 45 years. I had him, my parents had him, and whenever I came to replace him, he was going through the motions. He stopped learning, he stopped growing. And so kids hated that class. Every day there'd be tears when I first took over. And so aren't if you're not looking around and saying, what can I learn? What perspective can I challenge in myself? What information do you have that I don't have that we can learn from each other? If you're not approaching life with that constant theme of curiosity and growth and openness, being a lifelong learner is going to be challenging. So for me, every day, whether it's reading the news, whether it is scrolling my Twitter feed, Clubhouse, new app that's been interesting to listen to different perspectives, and it's just always it can get overwhelming. Always looking for new information, new things to learn, new areas to grow in. But the the reward, I think, is definitely it outweighs that burnout risk that you have.
Yeah. No, that's great. That's a really, really good point, because I think that, in the information age, that burnout is definitely a real thing.
Hmm.
Like I don't know, especially like over the last year, it's like constantly
Yep.
trying to get more and more information just to stay safe or stay sane. And
Yeah.
it is a burnout thing. I know that I've had to change my own tendencies to avoid that burnout. And
Hmm.
I think it's a skill that you have to develop, is just to being able to filter a lot of things. Let me see. We've got a couple questions in here. Oh, okay. So let's see. Rubina's asking about Twitter lists. Is that something that you actually have, or do you keep lists on Twitter?
Yeah, I have some lists. I can actually pull one up. There's a number. If you go to people's profiles, it usually shows where they've been listed or what lists they have. But let's see. Some that I have, there's an e-learning authorities, and I can share links out to this if you follow me at MPJ Instructional Design. We can put that link in. I have a few lists that I've curated over the years. There's lists that I'm on. But if you open up, especially I'm looking at the app right now, if you open up Twitter on a mobile phone, it's one of the items um, on that left hand menu, and you can discover. I look for e-learning, I look for instructional design. I'm also a big foodie, so unrelated to what we're talking about here, like my lifelong learning this past year, before like this and doing a few blog posts, I took last year off. I learned how to make pizza from scratch, how to make bread from scratch, and so I have lists that I'm following for like pizziolos and stuff like that. And
Yeah,
so it's expanding that PLN,
I
personal learning
love
network.
I love it. Yeah, that's something that I tend to gravitate towards too. I have to say, like YouTube food shows are kind of my
Hmm.
thing. I'm just constantly, I've got the iPad open in the kitchen. I'm just like,
Yep.
I'm gonna make this. And
Hmm.
I don't know. There's a guy, Chef John from Food Wishes, who's like my favorite. And actually, I guess he just moved to the town I live in. So I'm pretty stoked on that. Now, Dave has a good question. Are there any tools out there that are new or new to you that you want to learn? I wanted to ask you this actually.
Yeah.
Like, what are you learning right now? But
Yeah.
to Dave's question, new to you or that you want to learn, and just kind of things that'll take you to the next level.
Yeah. I think it's not entirely new to me, but it is the most or the least developed skill. I want to get more into custom coding. It's been a number of years since I've done anything from scratch in terms of HTML, JavaScript, and all of that. So going through like Codecademy, what is it, 3W School, I think, is another resource. Actually getting those chops back up for the programming side of development, just to enhance what I can do in the other tools, or on my personal website, or especially with, we haven't adopted XAPI, but knowing that that's where it's going, and so preparing for the future, that is the stuff that I'm most intrigued about right now. I've worked on the XAPI cohort for years, but haven't been able to really devote too much time for it. So it's that space, not really a tool as in Articulate or any of the others that I've talked about, but definitely a tool in the toolbox that I think is worth. It's kind of like building the house versus ordering something from Wayfair or a site like that. So.
Yeah, wow, that's very, very cool. I can tell you, since I work for a major tech publisher, the big one sort of overwhelmingly is Python. Everybody's
Yep.
doing Python.
Yep.
So, and I have access to a ton of instruction on how to learn Python. I never take advantage of it, but I should. Like, it's definitely, in fact, I'm
Yeah.
gonna add it to my things 3 to-do list is something to do at some point, because I think it's important.
It's definitely intimidating whenever you first get into it, even as someone that enjoys tinkering and learning and growing. It can be intimidating. I'll say that. But as an adults, we learn best by doing. So that's where like Codecademy that I mentioned has been a great resource to actually try it. It's not reading a bunch of text and then trying to figure out how to apply it. It's okay, we're going to show you how to build this one thing, and then you can grow that skill set over time.
Nice. Excellent. All right. Well, I'm going to wrap things up. I want to ask you, like, is there a particular project that you're especially proud of that you'd like to mention? I would love to hear it.
I think I don't have anything that's off the top of my head. I approach my work that is long. It's not so much about me being proud of the outcome as much of did I help the people that I'm trying to help. And so really anything that is successful, whether it's a one-page job aid doc in Google Sheets or Word, I'm proud of that because it helped the end user or helped the organization. I do tend to think through. I think I'm most fond of a lot of the work that I did when I was with a previous organization, a lot more of the visual, gorgeous graphic design, wow showpieces that are on their website. Can't really talk too much about that, but it's not to say that something that isn't pretty or wasn't engaging, or really like something that you would stop and or have people crowd around you at a conference, like at a demo fest or whatever. It's if it served its purpose and it met the needs of the learner, I have more value in terms of that outcome than the work that I produce.
Wow, that's great, Mike. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you sharing that with us, sharing all of this knowledge with our community, and finally meeting up after a couple of years. It's been great. Hope that maybe at some point I can meet you up face to face, and
Definitely
in real world, in the real world out there. But other than that, just thanks for spending time with us today, everybody. Thanks for being in and attending this morning. I just want to let you know there is later today at 11 o'clock Eastern time. No, sorry, 11 o'clock Pacific time. Joseph Suarez is going to be in the TLD campus, which is kind of like another air meet sort of spot that I've set up. He's going to be in there taking your questions about podcasting, being a YouTuber, lots of AV stuff. And I think he's in the audience now if you guys want to reach out to him. But he's going to be in there just kind of hanging out, doing I don't know, just like some office hours. And I'll be in there too. I'm going to go in there and hang out as well. But thanks everybody. Mike, thanks again. And let's see. We have another Crowdcast scheduled next week, so we'll see you then.
Thanks so much, Luis. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thanks.
Have a
Thanks,
good
everyone.
day.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.